We've just received word from LSS that they are replacing Battle Hardens going into next year with these new events called Showdowns. These are very similar to Battle Hardens. The only real difference is that they have a bigger prize pool and set gold foils for your top placing contenders. These are going to be Blade Beckoner equipments and Blossom of Spring with microtext for first place. And the reason for this is that these Battle Hardens that are now turning into Showdowns are going to be Silver Age. So we're making a tier list today. This could age poorly if LSS decides to immediately implement the rotation for heroes, whatever that may be, whether that's a set roster for the season or whatever. We're going to know more about that in the keynote, so 50-50 chance this video is irrelevant, but I wanted to do a quick tier list, that way people can start testing for this kind of stuff. A massive disclaimer before we start this tier list though, this is one person's opinion, and if you have your own testing data that you believe is reliable, that leads you to a different conclusion, I would say trust your gut on this. I have been playing a hero that is considered basically, non-competitive by a lot of players that I respect, but it has done nothing but good things for me. So if you are playing in Worlds, I feel like Florian is actually a fantastic pick. And so if you have your own opinion that you trust, take that and take my words with a grain of salt. The other thing too is that this is going to be a little bit harsh of a tier list. I'm going to split things into almost near binary black and white. The goal of this is trying to, equip you to win a Battle Hardened, or now these are called Showdowns. If you are playing at these, you want to win. If you win $1,500 plus a gold foil Blossom of Spring, you want to play the best decks possible. If you like playing, heroes that are in this no category or whatever, heroes I would not recommend you play. You're not an idiot, and it's not that you don't care about the game or you're not having fun. That's what's important. It's just for competitive players. If you are going to these tournaments with the intention of winning, you should plan accordingly, and you should play a deck that has the highest likelihood of winning, assuming that you can stand playing the deck. Despite the fact that Misfail was by far and above the best decks to be playing for the past year or so in Flesh and Blood, I never played them because I just didn't enjoy them. And of course, my win rate and my tournament results suffered. But at the end of the day, I knew what I wanted to play in the game. So don't take it as a slight against your hero or a class that you enjoy. If I just very quickly write it off as something that's not competitive, we have a lot of data from Fabry, Fab Blazing, and then my own, just results in playing the format for about 4 or 5 months now. So I will give an explanation for every single hero here, but a lot of them will probably be very short for the sake of time. I think actually it'll be easier for me to start with what I think kind of defines the meta. We've talked about this in the past, but I think that the meta is really defined by very strong linear aggro decks that have very strong on hits and explosive capabilities. So in my mind, those are going to be decks like Briar and Azalea. To me, I think these are the two pillars of these strong aggro decks. Briar offers really high damage output with high quality on hits. Azalea does the same, but also mixes disruption in. These are decks that just have good, card economy, card quality, and they are proven to be incredibly powerful. Another deck that I think kind of flexes somewhere in between aggro and mid-range is going to be Ira. Ira has been a proven contender for a long time now, and I think that she definitely leans more on the aggressive side. I wouldn't exactly call her a strict aggro deck, but you don't do very much blocking. And so to me, I think that these are the pillars. So if you are going to this event, I think you need to have a reason not to be playing one of these 3 heroes. And I think that you need to have a deck that can beat these 3 heroes reliably. So now we're going to start going through basically most of the heroes here. All the Arachnes, I don't think make the cut. I don't think that they disrupt reliably enough into these decks. And I think that even if you build them to be more aggressive, I don't think that they can keep pace with the overall value propositions that these decks are outputting. The closest one in my mind would be something like Marionette potentially flipping into Black Widow. But even then, you just don't have the pressure to be consistently ripping enough cards from these decks to actually stop them from enacting their game plan. Is kind of interesting, but I don't think that you should play Aurora because I think that Briar does the same thing. So there's going to be kind of a mix here where there's going to be decks that are going to end up in the no category, but that's because in my mind, there is a deck that is so far and above in that same talent or class that I think you should play instead. In my mind, I don't see any reason to play Aurora when Briar exists. Does that mean that Aurora has a bad win rate or a bad matchup spread? Of course not, because she plays basically all the same cards that Briar does. So her win rate on Fabry, for instance, is very good. However, if you're going to come to a tournament, I think you get 5 to 10% more win rate with Briar. And if you want to win the tournament, you should play that deck. So in my mind, if you told me you're playing Aurora, I would not feel like that's a very good pick because there is a deck that does the exact same thing better. Benji ends up in no because once again, I think it just doesn't do quite the same thing that Ira wants to do. I think that the deck is very interesting, but I don't quite think it's in the spot compared to Ira for you to play it. Betsy doesn't feel like it gets quite enough out of the helmet. Guardian as a whole, I think, has a couple that are definitely very valid meta contenders, but I don't feel like she is quite there compared to the rest of them. Bolton just takes too long, is too slow, and a little bit clunky. If it trips at all, it just does not keep pace with the fact that Briar descends 4s every single turn. Bravo is kind of an interesting one to me. It's going to land in yes, but like kind of contingent. So to me, Bravo feels more like Azalea. It's a very proactive, disruptive deck. This is not really a deck that wants to play like full block fatigue, but it can lean towards that. And I think you do get some nice flexibility between the two things. I think that it's a Guardian that actually has like good pressure, which is something that most Guardians can't do. And I think that it's clearly a hero that was made and kind of tuned for this upcoming format, since this was like a direct injection into the game. By nature, the other Bravo, I don't think it's worth playing. Chain is felt interesting. I think that it doesn't have the consistency for it to actually do anything explosive. It can rip Soul Shackles, but this format is too fast for it to really, accumulate to that huge endgame potential. In Commoner, you had Dirge and you had Seeds of Agony. Those completely flip the script in terms of what your deck's damage output is. And in this format, you kind of have to lean more into Runegate, which is inherently a little bit more setup focused and definitely has some consistency issues, especially losing Dirge. I think it has a potential to do something very powerful, and I wouldn't be surprised if someone cooks up something good. But if you were just taking this to the Battle-Hardened, I feel like that's not the right pick. Syndra obviously doesn't make the cut. It lacks a lot of the consistency pieces of CC. Her ability is just not really congruent with the non-legendary card pool. Her hero text is really tied to Flick Knives and Mask Momentum. Dash, Inventor Extraordinaire, just does everything that the aggro decks do, but worse. Her damage output is worse. Her consistency, I think, is a little bit better in some weird aspects, but her card advantage just isn't there. If you play a deck like Azalea, you have Death Dealer, Briar has Snatch. Like, these are just not comparable to Dash playing these boost cards. Did It All, I feel like, almost needs no explanation whatsoever. It is just not a functional hero with 3 intellect. Dio, Dash.io, I don't think is quite there. It has explosive capabilities, like a little bit more than the Inventor Extraordinaire, the original Dash. But ultimately, we are talking about decks that are inconsistent in a format where you get 2 turns to play the game correctly, and then the game is basically over. Dawnblade Dory ends up in a maybe tier for me because I do think that she actually can have a good matchup into like Briar and Azalea. Pressure with the Dawnblade counters is kind of interesting. However, I am concerned that you could just ignore the Dawnblade, let her get counters, and then just shoot her down from 20 immediately. But if there was like a warrior deck that I think could kind of target, Briar and Azalea, it might be her. The problem is once you pair into the Guardians, though, that's a really bad gambit to run. Dromai ends up in maybe to probably no tier for me. I understand that some people think that she's very powerful. Her results are just not showing that so far. I think that she can race the aggro decks and she can beat the slow decks, but I don't think that she actually beats Guardian. You have to understand that Dromai and CC playing into slower Guardians with less, red attacks like some of these decks are running would actually get the space with 40 health to basically go down to 10 life or whatever, completely flip the script and win the game. The problem in this format is like, the Dromai will start a board, your Guardian player will just pop a dragon and then send like Thunderquake for 10 at you. And then the game is like almost over. And then into aggro, you have to race really aggressively. So I don't think that she has like the life total to actually accumulate the board state like she did in CC. Enigma, I just don't think has a correct meta angle right now. I think that her aggro matchup is bad. If the format ever slows down, I think that she is more playable. Phi is interesting to me because in theory, I actually think that Phi is one of the better aggro decks because it has the best game into slow, blocky fatigue style decks. Like you just cannot fatigue this deck. If you were to bring like 4-block Oldhim or Bravo, whatever these, like kind of degenerate fatigue decks are, you're just not beating Phi. And I think that Phi has good game into like Icelander, any of the ice decks that give incidental frostbites because of his blue base. However, he just loses to his alien Briar or Ira as well, because he just doesn't do the same kind of aggro output that those decks do. He's a little bit more consistent and goes wider, but he doesn't have that same kind of card quality that those heroes do. He's going in maybe because if you want to play an aggro deck into a field where you're expecting a lot of slow decks, I think that he is probably the better one to pick up. But if you are going to go to a Battle-Hardened and you're expecting that everyone's going to be playing, Briar, Azalea, Ira, It's kind of weird, but I actually feel like he doesn't really make the cut in terms of what you probably should be playing. Fang, unfortunately, just doesn't really have a hero text until he's online, which makes it very difficult. You get to 3 fealty and then you die before you get to, go back to your turn with your cool, 3 card, 0 cost hand or whatever. It just doesn't have the explosiveness or like the consistency to really get online very quickly. It kind of needed what Florian had, which was like a reduction in how much it needs to complete its quest for in, the 20 health formats. Speaking of which, Florian doesn't make the cut. Once again, just having these heroes that need to set up and complete like this quest style mechanic in a format where the game is over in a couple turns, or in essence is over in the fact that you now have to start blocking with most of your cards defensively. It's just not going to really cut it for a format like this. It is a cool deck, though. I mean, I bought a Coldful Nebula Blade just because of this deck. I think it's very neat. I just don't think it has what it takes right now. Gravy, also, I just don't think it really has what it takes right now. It's just not really putting up any numbers. I almost want to put it next to Dromai, but I do think that it is proving to be a little bit worse than Dromai. And by that means, if Dromai is like barely holding on to a deck that you could register for this event, I don't think that Gravy ends up making the cut, unfortunately. Icelander is going to be a weird one here. I'm actually going to throw this one in no. I just don't think it's doing anything. I've seen the data, and the data is that it has a negative win rate. It's looking at 40% right now across Fabray, Fab Blazing. It is actually losing to a lot of decks I think you need to beat. And I kind of understand why. She doesn't have Waning Moon, and Waning Moon is a huge deal. Before, you used to be able to pitch a blue, play your Polar Blast or your Cold Snap from your arsenal, give your opponent a Frostbite, redraw a card, and with the 2 floating, you would just naturally hit your opponent for 3. It's an incredible rate for a blue. However, you just don't have those powerful play lines anymore, and Crucible is interesting, but it doesn't have that same kind of late game closing potential as well. Crucible gives you 1 reach in the end game, but Waning Moon gave you 3, and that's a really big difference. I also just think that with her current health total, it's just not really good enough. She really needed those defense reactions that she had in Commoner. You just don't have that kind of consistency of blocking and then being able to actually sculpt your own turns. I think that if your opponent has 1 power turn, the game is practically over. This is probably the most controversial opinion on this tier list, and I could totally be wrong on this. It's just, despite everything that I wanted to believe, it's just not performing well. And even testing it, I already kind of see the cracks in how the deck functions. Kano, I just don't think it has it, honestly. It sends Vanilla Arcane, doesn't have any sort of scaling damage like it did in Blitz with Aether Flare, Wildfire, all that kind of stuff. You're mainly descending vanilla damage off the top of the deck. That's just not good enough for a format like this. Kasai, the original one, actually, I think could go in maybe. The problem is I think it just gets run over by the aggro decks, but the cost reduction, if Icelander ends up not being popular, means that you do kind of get to convert the deck to playing more greedy with its resource curve and playing more 1 costs. And that actually, I think, will actually give you a bit of an edge over the other Kasai, which upon further reflection, I think is probably the worst between the two. Originally, I thought this one was a little bit better because I didn't really think the cost reduction mattered. I thought it would only matter when you pair into Icelander, but upon thinking about the deck some more, I think you can just build the deck differently to have more 1 costs. In which case, I think that it kind of edges out the other Kasai. So I think if you were to play one of these dual hand warriors, I think that the original Kasai probably makes the cut. Katsu just doesn't have it. It doesn't have like the dishonor lines or the explosive potential. You do have some like kind of smooth hands that work for you, but you're really dependent on drawing Whelming. And once again, you got 2 turns to draw like a natural surging line, right? I don't want to put my stakes on that. Unlike a lot of people, I can actually say that I have built a Cavdine deck. I did it as part of the deck building process for this entire format. It doesn't do anything, so don't worry about it. It plays all generic soup. That's not good enough. The new KO, I don't really think does it. I can kind of tell that they had some weird intentional bans between Fiddlers and Sigil. I think that part of this was probably to prevent some kind of fatigue in the format, but I also think that they were maybe worried about him. Regardless, if that was the intent, then the ban did its job because I don't think the deck really has what it takes to compete right now. The original KO is a complete joke. You roll dice. I mean, you could potentially maybe win all your die rolls and spike the whole tournament, but are we really going to do that? The heavy hitters KO, though, I think does actually probably end up in the yes category. Its testing results are good. I think that it does pretty good damage. If you lean into things like Savage Feast with the boots, you can keep up with these other aggro decks like Briar and Azalea for a couple turns, and you can kind of match their card quality. And you do actually get some disruption with Strongest Survive, which is something that those decks don't get to play. So I think if you get to kind of race them, but also mix in disruption, you kind of end up in a similar spot as Azalea. His fridge is also kind of interesting too, having that temper 2 headpiece. I think that that is one I actually would probably give a pretty good stamp of approval. By nature just doesn't have it. She has too many consistency issues, and we just don't have time to sculpt graveyards with 20 health. Lexi, while being really interesting having different builds, I think is ultimately just a less consistent Azalea. You can play the Death Dealer, lightning style list, but you are asking for a lot of things to go your way in terms of variance. And I just don't want to do that when I can just default to Azalea with Death Dealer. That is the problem with most of the tier lists, is just a lot of things are just strictly worse. And I think that you probably end up just playing the thing that's proven to do it more consistently. Eliath has a very inherent exploitable problem where you set up auras, but that requires you to live till your turn to use them. So maybe you have 9 mites popping, but if your opponent does like a 5-card hand into you and you die, the 9 mites mean nothing. So I think in a 40 health format, you have the ability to wait on your turn for those things to go off and actually have the leverage. But in this format, you just don't have it. Marlin is almost completely unplayable. There's really not much to say here. She doesn't really have any good power cards, and everything that she could do is just trumped by Azalea. Max doesn't really have what it takes, in my opinion. It feels like a worse version of Dash IE in a lot of instances. And if Dash IE isn't making the cut, he isn't either by proxy. New, I think, could end up maybe one day being good. It's just not her right meta right now. She needs a lot more Guardians and slower decks with good quality blues to make up the format. You maybe could get lucky and pair into Bravo or KO all day, but even KO is like kind of a risky one, right? Because you got 20 health. Oldhim, in my opinion, I think is the de facto Guardian. Even Bravo is like, I almost want to move him down to maybe, just because I feel like you should be playing Oldhim if you are going to play a Guardian. And then any other Guardian you would register, you need to have a very good reason to do it. Oldhim has the biggest card pool of all the Guardians, being dual talent. He has the Ice React, which is incredibly important against these aggro decks. And you just have better card quality because of your expanded card pool. I think that Bravo has a pretty good ability, but if I really were to pick a Guardian, I think I'm just defaulting to Oldhim, and anything else I think you're going to have to sell me on. Olympia, despite the data, is going to go down in the no tier. The reason for this is that it functions like a Guardian deck with none of the disruption. So I think if you are going to play a deck because you want to present like kind of a 2-forked problem where you either can grind out your opponent by sending a 1-card 4 every single turn or threaten to fatigue them, you should be playing a deck like Guardian, and you should be playing a deck like Oldhim that actually has the ability to control the tempo of the game. If you are playing Olympia, Decimator Great Axe, and your Briar opponent sculpts a 5-card hand with Burn Up Shock, how do you actually stop them from enacting that? You actually have an answer in Oldhim. You can play things like Boulder Drop, Choke Slam. You can Ice React them on their own turn. You have really good equipment, including the Buckler, to stop the on-hit. Olympia, you do not have that. You are only hoping that the blocking capabilities of your cards will match up perfectly with their offensive output. You need to have a way to actually stop these aggro decks from functioning, and you need to actually trade damage with them in a way that actually requires them to block with cards. If you make the Briar have to block with a whole card to stop a on-hit like a Crush effect, you are inherently getting implied value out of the fact that they had to use, maybe their 0 for 4 as a 2 block instead. You need those kinds of edges if you're going to be playing against these decks in this format. I don't think that Olympia makes the cut, because I think that you always should be defaulting to a deck that plays exactly the same but actually has disruption baked into the class. It's a little bit harsh, but once again, we're here to win the Battle Hardened. And if I'm trying to win the Battle Hardened and I want to play a control, attrition style game plan, I'm not registering Olympia. I'm going to play Oldhim or I'm going to play Bravo. Acilio is just not functional without the extra sigils. You need Brilliance, you need Gun to Flash, you need the equipments. It's just not functioning right now in Silver Age. And that's okay. Things could always change. Pleiades doesn't make the cut because I think that she does what the other Guardians do, but worse. Prism is just lacking the easy access to go again that Luminaris provides. Pain 2 for Celestial is just not it. And she doesn't really have a whole lot of mileage out of her hero text in this format. I think if it was like the newer Prism that could play Figments in this format, that'd be crazy and that would be fine. But that Prism is a Majestic and the Figments are Majestic. So all of that's kind of pointless. If you were going to play Puffin, I don't exactly know what your meta angle would be. I don't think the deck is like very close to functional at all. Unfortunately, it's a hero I like a lot, but it's just not there right now. Rhinar, I don't think does anything that KO does better. You don't really have like the same kind of hero text or the card quality in your deck. You're forced to run a lot of yellows instead of blues. I don't think it makes the cut over KO. Riptide is definitely a maybe. This to me is kind of like a dark horse. I feel like this could be something that you could try testing. I think you can probably get some edge into the aggro decks, and you can build the deck to be just as aggressive as Azalea, and you maybe can sort of attrition out the Guardians. Scurv losing the NIMBY package was just too much. The deck basically plays like generic soup now, and it doesn't really do anything. You are limited down to only the pirate card pool and generics. Just doesn't have what it used to. Teklevasen is basically entirely unplayable. There's no meta angle that you would register this hero for, just too slow. Terra is interesting. I'm going to ultimately put it in no. I understand that its data is good. I know that data is good, but once again, we're looking at things of opportunity cost. If you are registering Terra as a Earth Elemental Guardian, you are giving up playing Oldhim, who is an Ice Earth Elemental Guardian. I don't think that the +1 resource sink from Terra outmatches the ability to run ice cards like Blue Winter's Bite and be able to ice react your aggro opponents during their own turn. I just don't think that that's what it takes. If anything, you maybe can make an argument and you could play this into the Guardian Mirror, and it might be a good mirror answer. But if I were playing the Guardian Mirror, I think I would rather just play Flattering Showman. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on it. Tough Nut's not functional. You need Rock for this deck to even get close to being playable. Azuri, unfortunately, is not very playable. There's just not enough good disruption to flip into. You don't actually really present disruption. You mainly just present okay numbers, but they're not even above rate numbers. They're barely passable. Valda just doesn't really have a hero text in this format. People aren't drawing cards, and you should register the other Guardians over her. Verdance just unfortunately doesn't do anything powerful in this format, really. She really is kind of kept in CC by the fact she has Striders and Felling. In this format, I think the flaws of that show through. Victor, I think, is a maybe to me. It's kind of difficult because I think if you were to play Victor because of the aggro hero matchup, I think you probably should register Oldhim. So I'm really trying to figure out where the angle Victor has is. Maybe he has better matchup spread into the mirror or KO maybe. But the problem is if you play against KO, you're clashing all day. And you're probably going to lose your clashes. So I'm not exactly sure when I would want to register Victor instead of Oldhim or Bravo. But if you can find that angle, then I think that's what he's in the maybe tier. This right just isn't doing it. I think the deck is actually really cool, and it plays really similar to what it did in CC after the Thorn ban before Rosetta came out. It can do some cool stuff, but ultimately I just don't think it has what it takes compared to the other aggro decks. Vinza is a maybe to me, but I have seen some promise with her, so who knows, maybe someone can build something that's consistent. My main concern though is that if you draw your opening hand and it's 4 Runegate attacks and you're playing against Briar, the game is basically over. So I really don't know exactly why you would want to register this hero. I think that she doesn't really have what it takes to beat everything in the spread here. I think you might register her because she's fun, which is totally valid. But now that I'm saying all of that out loud, that sounds like a hero that you probably should not register. So I'm sorry. And then finally, Zen, that's not playable. Don't worry about it. The hood thing is cool, but it's just not consistent. And so that's my initial reactions to the format, assuming that they do not introduce immediate hero rotations or hero rosters for these showdowns. So we'll see if this is even relevant info. But I think that ultimately my opinion of this format is that it is ruled by 3 very good aggressive decks with good value that do not trip up very often. And you need to play a deck that can either keep pace with them reliably for the first 2 to 3 turns of the game, or you need to play a deck that consistently disrupts them. You cannot pick a deck that has some disruption in it. You need to pick a deck that has disruption every single turn. And that's what kind of solidifies that yes category to me, where if you were to say, hey, I'm going to register Oldhim for this event, does that sound like a good idea? I would say yes, because it has Ice React, because it has Red Boulder Drop, because you are never going to trip up on disruption. You can present Fatigue into a lot of decks. You have very good numbers. You have good equipment. If you were to say, hey, I think about playing KO, I would say yes, because that deck has good aggro. It can race with those top decks. You can play cards like Savage Feast even down into the yellow copies. And you also have disruption with Strongest Survive and cut down the size, so you can also present aggression into them. If you're to say, I want to play Arachne Marionette, I would say no. I would say no, because it just doesn't have what it takes to actually consistently disrupt or keep pace with anything in the format. So you're kind of seeing what the point of this tier list is. And then, the maybe is well, should I play 5? Well, maybe. I don't really know. That might be a good call. It might not be. You'll have to see how it goes. So that's where you're going to have to trust your gut on that. So hopefully this kind of gave an idea of where the format is at with some testing, with some, deck lists for every single hero available. If you are interested in seeing a lot more of the content, we have, deck lists for basically every single hero in the game at this point. And these are just my thoughts. So let me know yours down in the comments below. Until next time, thank you for watching.